Hello and welcome to my channel, Scaria ASMR. Today I am going to ramble a bit about China. I lived in China for 2 years and it came up on my most recent and only live stream, and I had a subscriber request to talk about it. So I also did a poll. It was my first time on the community tab, and it was kind of fun. I was surprised. I offered sort of which video I should work on first, and talking about China was the winner by a small margin in the end. But I am working on the other videos as well. Okay. So I did do a little bit of prep work. I have this scrapbook, and scrap might be a keyword here. This book was given to me right before I left for China, and it was at my going away party that my family threw, which was so sweet and unexpected, and made me feel just wonderful. But in this book, they wrote a bunch of sweet notes to me, wishing me well, congratulating me on graduating college, because it was right around then. And I went through and added a bunch of little sticky notes to hide personal information or to hide the faces of people in pictures. But before I get to my little scrapbook, I have been asked a lot how I decided to go to China and sort of what brought me there. And I've decided, since this is a ramble video, to tell the long story. I'm gonna go long on this one. Okay, so why did I want to go to China? I think it started in my 8th grade, but if I'm going really long, I will say I've always been a very independent person. As a kid, it's not that I ran away a lot. I wasn't running from anything, but I did run to things without other people or parental permission. So I've always had a sort of wandering streak in me. So wanting to do something like this wasn't, I think, surprising for my family. But in 8th grade, 2 important things happened that I think caused me to set my sights on China. And the first thing was I met my future sister-in-law. She's now been my sister-in-law for many years. My brother is much older than I am, so I met my future sister-in-law when I was 13. I know, outside of America, people don't use terms like 8th grade. I was 13. And she is Chinese. She's from Indonesia, so she is a minority ethnic group that came from China. So she's not Han Chinese, she's Hokkien. And growing up, she spoke Hokkien at home. She spoke Bahasa Indonesian at school, and her family watched a lot of Chinese TV, so she knows Mandarin, but her accent is very, very strong. And so the Hokkien people, I believe they're from Fujian originally. I mean, like originally, because she met my Taiwanese friend, and the language wasn't that different from what my Taiwanese friend spoke. And I think both languages originated in Fujian. Now, I don't speak Fujianhua, I don't speak Hokkien, I don't speak Taiwanese, but that was sort of my understanding of how they could understand each other, speaking these 2 different languages. They both speak English too. So yeah, when I was 13, I met my sister-in-law, I'm just gonna refer to her as my sister from now on because that's how I talk about her in real life. And I had not, at 13, I wasn't very worldly. I'd never been outside of the US, I think. And I don't know if I knew anything about Indonesia. But in school that year, we had a really long history segment on China. And we learned the ancient history, we learned the philosophy, which was some of my favorite parts. And I really, really loved learning about the language. So we didn't learn the language in school, but we learned about it. And I thought it was so pretty. I thought it was interesting. I learned about the tones, and I liked the idea of learning that. So I was just fascinated and really wanted to learn Chinese after that. Again, Mandarin Chinese is not my sister's first language. It's like her fourth, and probably the one she speaks the worst, but I was 13 and not terribly bright. Okay. So I had this idea in my mind. I was gonna learn Chinese. Now, high school didn't have that option. Most high schools in the US, if they offer languages, it's gonna be Spanish, French, and Latin. I took Spanish. I was pretty good at Spanish, but I didn't keep going with it past my first year of college. So my first year of college, this was my opportunity. This was the time. I was so excited to be able to choose my classes. In high school we just didn't have much of a choice, but in college you can choose your classes and you can learn Chinese. Well, I didn't. My first year, and this is true across, I think, most US schools, they give the first years the worst time slot for picking classes. So by the time they sign up, most classes are full. And I tried to sign up for Chinese. It was the first thing I had picked out, and it was full. So I asked my advisor what to do, and she said, okay, sign up for something that is the same time as Chinese, the same number of hours and all of that, and then email the Chinese instructors or the head of the department and tell them how much you want to study Chinese, and they'll let you in. It should be no problem. So I did that, and I ended up taking Japanese for a year. Japanese was next to Chinese in the course catalog. It was at the same time, the same number of hours. I signed up, and the head of the department in Chinese was like, well, the classes are full. What do you want me to do? I was like, well, I want you to let me take Chinese anyway. And they were like, the class is full. So I took Japanese kind of by accident. I took like a year of it, because after the first semester, I couldn't start Chinese. I missed the first semester, so I just kept going. I do remember a little Japanese. Hajimemashite, hajimemashite. Watashi wa Biscaria desu. The first thing they taught us in Japanese class was, is English okay? Like, can we speak English? Is English okay? Eigo ii desu ka? Eigo ii desu ka? And eigo is English, I is good, and desu ka is it? Eigo ii desu ka? And then they taught us the word no. Yeah. English was never okay. I actually really enjoyed my year of Japanese. It was my favorite class my first year. So despite the fact that I didn't want to learn Japanese, or it wasn't my goal, it wasn't my dream, I really did like it. But I only took that 1 year. However, how does this relate to anything? That year I learned about a program in the US think it's just the US, that sends college graduates to Japan for 2 to 3 years. They often teach English and they're immersed in the culture. And I thought, okay, that sounds really cool. I think I would like going to Japan. I'll keep this in mind for when I graduate. And then a lot of things happened in my life that aren't terribly important to the story, but my second year of college was very different from my first year of college, and I ended up taking Chinese. And I learned about a program through my college, so not a national program, but specific to my college, where they send people to different sites in Asia for 2 years, 1 to 2 years, to teach English or do other things depending on which site you're at. And the original site, the earliest site, was actually the site I went to. And the reason this program exists is because of the Boxer Rebellion in China. So I told you I was going to go long. The Boxer Rebellion in China was in 1900. So this rebellion by the Boxers is the English word for them. The Chinese word is actually much cooler. It's the Yihechuan, and it translates to righteous and harmonious fists, which is a much cooler word than boxer. It was a secret society, and it was very, very anti-immigrant, anti-foreign influence, anti-American, just not traditional Chinese. And so in the late 1800s, there were missionaries in China trying to convert people to Christianity, among other things, including some who had been at my college. And in the Boxer Rebellion, and they targeted foreigners. And they also targeted anyone who was helping the foreigners or people who had converted. And so it wasn't just a slaughter of non-Chinese people, it was a slaughter of people who had given in to foreign influence. So the missionaries who had been from my college were killed in this rebellion. And at the end of it, the rest of the world was a little bit peeved with China. They weren't happy their people had been killed in this way, and they demanded that China pay reparations for what they had done. In the rebellion, it seems like the numbers aren't very well known how many people died. It seems like up to 100,000 people died, but only like 250 of those were foreign nationals, so mainly the targets were actually Chinese people. Regardless, the European nations and the US demanded reparations from China. I'm not sure what the actual numbers were, but they got their reparations. And what I was told by my Chinese teacher was that the European nations really just kept the money, whereas the US actually reinvested that money in China, building like hospitals and things. I hope that's true, that we used our money to do something good. But even as I'm saying it, I wonder how much that was also just to gain more influence over the nation. But the other thing that happened was my college specifically got money for our missionaries who were killed. And my college made a foundation with it that had the goal of improving relations with East Asia in hopes that things like this wouldn't happen again. So that was the goal of this organization. And the first site was in the province where our missionaries had been killed. So that's Shanxi province in sort of the middle north of China. It's very agricultural. Now there's a lot of coal mining. So it is not near a big city. The place I went to is called Taigu. And when I told local Chinese people I was going there or that I lived there, they'd be like, "Are you sure? Do you mean Taiyuan?" Or sometimes they would mean Taiguo, which is Thailand. They're like, "Oh, you mean to go to Thailand?" And I'd be like, "No, not Thailand. I'm going to Shanxi Taigu." So it's just a small town that has an agricultural university. And the university, I think, had about 20,000 students. So the university was fairly large, much larger than my college. But the town itself was, by China standards, very small. I think maybe with the university it was 40,000 people. But I'm ahead of myself now. Okay, so the Boxer Rebellion happened. The reparations were paid. This organization at my college was created. And my second year of college, I learned about it. So I had this interest in China. I wanted to live abroad. I did do a summer in Beijing before I moved to China. So it was between years, I think between my second year and third year of school. I did a summer in Beijing, which was very fun, very interesting, very hot. Beijing is really muggy in the summer, and it didn't discourage me. It didn't say, okay, I hate this, I never want to go to China again. No, I didn't have that experience. So I worked toward going to China for this program for 2 years, and that was kind of it. I applied, I was accepted, so I was made a fellow. And what were my duties? I was teaching at this agricultural university, so I was teaching mainly graduate students, so students who were between like 24 and 30 years old. No, they were younger, maybe 22 and 30 was sort of the age range, which included me at the time. So I was the age of many of my students. They estimated me as being older. They were not good at guessing my age. They really couldn't tell, so they thought I was older than I was. And that happened around China. I guess I look old, or older than I am. So that happened a lot. Okay, so I was teaching those students. They were master's students for the most part, not PhD students, and they were not English majors. So they weren't there to learn English. They were there mostly for agricultural reasons. Their majors sort of ranged. I did have a group whose major was like political education in China, so you can kind of like figure out what that means. And then I did have each semester I had one class of first year English majors, and they were so much younger than my graduate students. They were harder to teach, but that was not their fault. For some reason, for those students, they put me in a classroom that didn't have a blackboard or a whiteboard. So it was just much harder to, give them things they could see. I had to rely on handouts and things like that. It was a very frustrating room, and I don't know why they did it that way. Because I was meant to be teaching oral English. Who is a better expert on how to talk than someone who natively talks in their language? On the other hand, people who natively talk in their language probably haven't had to teach other people how to do it. Being good at something doesn't make you a natural teacher, but I do think one of the problems with teaching was they had learned a mishmash of UK English and American English, and sometimes that would get a little weird for me. They would often ask me, like, how do you do? I actually don't know how to answer that question. Like, do you say fine? How do you do? Fine, good, not bad. I do fine. How do you do? I don't know. How do I do what? I don't know what the answer to that is. I am pretty sure it's British English, UK English. They also liked to say needn't. You needn't do that. Now that one I know what it means. It just to me sounds really cute. We don't say that here. I've never heard an American say needn't. I did mention I studied Chinese. Before I started as a teacher, part of my program was to spend another summer in Beijing, or I think I could have picked a different city, but the best program was in Beijing, and do an immersive language program. So by the time I moved to Taegu, I think I was the equivalent of like a sixth-year Chinese student, so pretty high. One question I've gotten, either as a question or as an assumption that sort of surprised me, is people who have said, oh, well, you learned to speak the language, but you didn't learn to read it, right? And I think, well, why would I learn to speak a language and not learn how to read or write? I can see some uses for only learning to speak, but if you're living in a country, why wouldn't you want to learn to read? So I did learn to read and write. My handwriting in Chinese is a little bit better than my handwriting in English. My handwriting in English is garbage. And I actually thought by the end of my time there, my reading was my best skill. I was really pleased that I could go up to like any bus schedule, because they have their bus stops, they have these big signs that have the entire bus schedule on there, which is incredibly handy, and I could read it, which was super helpful, because if I was nervous, if I was in a new city, which I often was, I often traveled alone, I could read, I could figure out where I was going, and I could read how many stops it was, and I could memorize the names of the stops just prior to where I wanted to get off. And that was really a load off my mind, because otherwise I would just be, nervously sitting there waiting to hear the name of the bus stop, and not all buses had a functional PA system. So if I could read the bus stop signs too on the way, that was helpful. Actually, the worst place for this was Italy. I took the bus in Italy, and their buses just didn't announce where they were. I just had to guess. We're going so fast. It's not like I could be reading the street signs, especially since I don't speak Italian. But, Italian is close enough to English that, the sounds I would get, if you say a place in Italy, I could probably repeat it back to you pretty well and understand if you said it again. So that was Italy. I found a little bit more challenging at times. But so I can read, I could read. So I've been back in the States for a while, right? And going through my little scrapbook over here, I realized just how many words I can't read anymore. Because there were a lot of ticket stubs I was looking at, and I couldn't figure out what they were for. And that made me a little sad. I've recently been watching a Chinese TV show that I really like. It's like a fantasy show and action. I'll just recommend it right now. This is a ramble, right? It's called The Untamed. The Untamed, and it's about mainly, the main character is Wei Wuxian, and it's what is it about? It's about magic and ethics. It's about his relationship with his brother and his sister, and with his friend, and it's based on a book. In the book, his friend is actually his lover. But because they made the show in China, the censors there are very strong, and you cannot show any sort of gay love. You don't really show a lot of heterosexual love either. There is a heterosexual couple in the show, and they don't kiss or anything. But so there's a lot of subtext. It's not queer baiting because they really are meant to be together, and I personally think the show shows that. So it's an interesting story. It's kind of like a live action anime. So again, it's called The Untamed. It is in Chinese with subtitles. In America, it's on Netflix. The subtitles at times were not great, and or like they didn't have enough context, or they made a joke not funny, things like that. And so it was nice to listen to it because I could feel some of my Chinese coming back, and I could feel that part of my brain working again. I do think my Chinese got better from watching it, but yeah, so that is a tangent for this ramble video, which is already longer than I thought it would be. And I don't remember where I was, other than I've forgotten my Chinese and I've been watching a Chinese show. Will I ever use my Chinese again? Will I have reason to study? I don't know. Okay, yeah, so coming back to the story, I graduated college. I had a going away party where I got my little book, and then I moved to Beijing. The first day actually was terrible. It was an ill omen. I had this flight, and it was a straight flight from Chicago to Beijing, which is a long flight. I think it was like 12 hours. And it got even longer because for some reason, and I never got an explanation on this, Beijing decided we couldn't land. They just said, no, not you. So our plane sort of did like circles around Beijing for a while. And then we landed in Taiyuan, which had never had a plane as big as ours on their runway. I saw like baggage handlers outside taking pictures of our plane because it was so random. And we sat on their runway for an hour, or maybe longer, I'm not sure. And then eventually we took off again and went to Beijing. And the end result of this was I was supposed to land at about 2 p.m. And from there I was going to take a taxi to meet this guy who was going to give me the keys to my apartment that I had set up. But by the time we landed, it was 10 p.m. And that guy was no longer where I was supposed to meet him. You know, I was meeting him at his place of business, and he went home because it was 10 p.m. And I didn't have a way to get my keys. So I was just sort of standing in the airport in Beijing with 2 enormous bags because, you know, I had everything I needed for 2 years, you know, just clothes and stuff and everything, and nowhere to go. And I was really overwhelmed. I had this perfect plan, and it did not come to fruition. And I ended up, you know, and I always felt a little weird about this. There are all these like hotels and guys from hotels at the airport who try to, you know, herd you to go to their hotel and not elsewhere. And I'm always like, no, that seems really scammy. At that point, I was fine with being scammed as long as it was like actually a hotel, you know, if it had a bed and a bathroom that was clean. I didn't care how much they were going to charge me, so I ended up doing that, and it was fine. You know, it's possible I paid more than I would have elsewhere, but that money went toward relieving my emotional distress at being alone in the Beijing airport. And I ended up moving into my place a few days later because I couldn't meet up with that guy. which is very annoying. But then I had a stroke of good luck because my apartment in Beijing was a 7th story walk up. And again, I had these 2 enormous bags that each weighed like at least 60 pounds. And in kilograms, it's going to be like between 25 and 30 kilograms is how much they weighed. So like heavy. And I was staring at these stairs and I was just like, oh my god, I can do this, but it's, June in Beijing. It's 100% humidity and 90 degrees, or in Celsius like 30 degrees. And then this guy walked past me and he was clearly a bodybuilder and he was drinking a Gatorade. He had like the shirt sleeves cut off so you could see his big arms. And my friend who was with me was like, excuse me, sir, with the big arms, do you think you could help us? And he looks at my bags and he's like, yeah. And I think he did them one at a time, but he carried them up the 7 stories like they were nothing. And he was just like, all right, see you later. And I never saw him again, despite the fact that I lived there for almost 3 months. And so that was just a stroke of luck, my first stroke of luck on moving to China. So I'm gonna leave this here. And actually the scrapbook I think is going to be a second video because I didn't expect to ramble this long. And hopefully you're asleep. Okay. Well, I'll wish you one which is a good night, peaceful night, quiet